Well, welcome. This is really exciting to have so many bodies in this room together at the same time. I'm Julia Bryan-Wilson, the Doris and Clarence Mallow Professor of Art History and Director of the Arts Research Center, a think tank for the arts here at UC Berkeley. And I am so delighted to see you all in the flesh and to welcome Dario Robleto, who is our artist in residence for spring 2022. Before I introduce Dario, I have some words of housekeeping and gratitude. First, I'll note that he and I will be unmasked for speaking purposes, but we do request for the continued safety of everyone that the audience stay masked if you can. Thanks for understanding. Tonight's event is co-sponsored by the Departments of Art Practice and Ethnic Studies, the Latinx Research Center, the Berkeley Center for New Media, and the Program in Critical Theory. And I'm thankful to everyone who helped organize this, including the staff at the Arts Research Center, not least Lori McPhee and Sophia Hussein, and the good people from ETS who are providing technical assistance. Thank you all so much. I want to acknowledge that UC Berkeley sits on the territory of Huchen, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone peoples, specifically the confederated villages of Lishan. Every member of the Berkeley community has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land. And I acknowledge that the Ohlone peoples are alive and flourishing members of Berkeley and the broader East Bay communities. Moving beyond words, I encourage everyone who lives on stolen territory to pay a Shumi land tax, which the Arts Research Center does pay to the Sogorea-Te Land Trust towards the rematriation and ongoing stewardship of this land. And Shumi means gift in Chochenyo, but I think of it as an obligation and a gesture of material commitment. Lastly, I would like to draw your attention to our next Arts Research Center event, which is upcoming on Friday, April 1st, which is artist Wendy Red Star in conversation with Professor Beth Piatote, part of an extensive series of events on the Berkeley campus this spring dedicated to Indigenous cultural practices. And you can find out more about this and other upcoming events at our website, which is arts.berkeley.edu. So on to our speaker. Dario Robleto is a renowned artist, researcher, writer, filmmaker, sculptor, citizen scientist, and self-described materialist poet, whose art of the last 25 years shows his deep commitment to thinking with and through the tangled histories of objects and the ways that memory is embedded in unraveling threads, in fragments of shells, or in a few lines of the lyrics of a favorite song. Dario was born in San Antonio and now is based in Houston, Texas, where he has established himself as one of the most sensitive and thoughtful contemporary artists working across science, technology, and handmade creative practices. And he has established collaborations with everyone from cardiologists who are aiming to chart the human heartbeat, to neuroscientists mapping the signals of the brain, to astronomers probing the possibility of life outside our planet. He's the only artist I know who regularly contributes to engineering publications on mobile brain-body imaging, as well as is included in group shows about the paranormal and the spirit world. For years, I've known about and admired Dario's meticulously handcrafted experiments with unusual historical artifacts, such as fossilized prehistoric whale ear bones salvaged from the sea, some possibly millions of years old, and shards of soldiers' personal mirrors from various conflicts. I also marveled at his early subtle performances, what I think of as his gentle guerrilla actions, such as replacing the porch lights of all of his neighbors with slightly higher wattage bulbs so that the entire block shone just a little brighter. Dario has had solo shows at venues that include the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Contemporary Art Museum of Houston, the Frye Art Museum in Seattle, and the Menil Collection. And his many awards include grants from the Sloan Foundation, a United States Artists Award, a Smithsonian Artist Research Fellowship, and as well as residencies at the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation, the Headland Center for the Arts, and the SETI Institute, which is dedicated to searching for signs of extraterrestrial communication. In 2016, he was appointed as the Texas State Artist Laureate. He's been a visiting scholar quite recently at Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard and at the Block Museum at Northwestern, which along with the Cantor Center for the Arts at Stanford will soon be mounting a 10-year survey of his art. He's working on his first book called Life Signs: The Tender Science of the Pulsewave, co-authored with art historian Jennifer Roberts. and he's premiering his first film, The Aorta of the Archivist, at the Free State Film Festival. When I first met Dario face-to-face last October, I recognized in him a kindred spirit of sorts. His art can linger on love and expressions that are beautiful, passionate, and deeply felt, but he also looks unflinchingly at death, loss, and the despair that can attend to desire. He began a project about war after 9/11 that lasted for a full decade. He is unafraid to use his artistic practice to grapple with some of the big questions, capital B, capital Q, questions that are almost impossibly ambitious in their scope, like, are we alone in the universe? What does a heart in love look like? How do we go on in the face of the overwhelming climate crisis? Critics have called him everything from an alchemist to a sorcerer, but to me, he has become a cherished colleague with whom I can talk about everything from our reveling in Patsy Cline's voice to our shared academic interests in telepathy that has bled into the also non-academic interest in telepathy. Dario is the perfect embodiment of what art as research looks like, and it is so fitting that our first in-person event in more than 2 years, in a pandemic largely deprived of bodies and physical touch, so saturated with mourning, would be with an artist whose work is so invested, both in tactile modes of working through grief and in finding life-sustaining pleasure in collective enthusiasms. Please join me in welcoming Dario Robleto.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you. Wow. That was a beautiful intro. Thank you, Julia. And thank you to the center as well. And I understand it's your first live in-person event in almost 2 years. And I will think we should all, take a moment to think about that. And it's a time of appreciating what was gone. And these things really do matter. I love the opportunity to speak to other people, especially young artists, about art. And I don't think I needed much reminder to be appreciative, but I certainly have it again. So I'm really happy to have this moment with you as we feel each other out again and see how we're going to think in public together. So I'm just thrilled to be here, as I said. And I was reflecting earlier about I've been to the campus several times over the years, and I can't believe that it's been 14 years. I was in a group show here. If there's time, I put a piece in the talk tonight to show you about that. And as Julia mentioned, I've been on campus several times for an organization I'm part of called the Breakthrough Initiative, as well as the SETI Institute, who has a Berkeley center here. And as Julia mentioned too, it's big question about, are we alone in the universe? And I think it's one of the most profound things we could ask as humans. But incredibly, I've never engaged with the arts here, the art department or the center. So I'm really glad to correct that today. And I think it's a perfect fit to do this with your Arts Research Center, because I would even go as far as saying that I'm sorry, I forgot to put up my title slide here. I would go as far as saying that I'm only as good an artist as I am a researcher. And I don't think that's an obvious thing to say. Don't expect every artist to say that. And I'm certainly in no way sort of downplaying what artists do as far as research, but obviously I'm all in on being an artist. But my point is that there is something different. There's a different set of questions that come about when an artist, brings that in 100% into their practice. And it's interesting to me to think about what's different about an artist researching as opposed to a scientist or an economist or a historian. What are the standards we're using to gauge that research? So that has been a lifelong passion of mine. It has been to poke at these disciplinary boundaries. And it's been, as Julie said too, I also can't sometimes believe the numbers, but I've been an artist for 25 years, and as much as I love making objects, I make no secret about I have another agenda too. which is to push hard on the assumptions between disciplinary boundaries. And I mean this, not in just a symbolic way. There's a certain level of back patting we can do when we're interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary. I love it, but I'm talking about something weirder than that. I'm talking about something that only comes about with long-term engagement. The projects that I tend to get involved with scientists tend to run years and years and years, and that's on purpose, because I really think there's something that can only reveal itself with the type of long-term engagement to where things, like I said, get weird and definitely uncomfortable. I really want to get to the uncomfortable place with a scientist, for example. Let's see, orient myself here for a second. So, today I'm actually going to do a little different type of a talk, which I'm excited to do at the invitation by Julia. But I wanted to just put up front quickly some examples of what I mean. At this point, I've got to do incredible projects with cardiologists, artificial heart researchers, neuroscientists, the astrobiologists looking for life on other planets. Just feel really, really lucky to have done this work. But it wasn't by accident. And what I want to say up front here about this, even though I'm not going to linger on these projects too much, is that equally important to my work, along with whatever objects I make, I'm really invested in building the infrastructure between arts and other disciplines. And it's not a trivial thing. It's really hard for a scientist and an artist to just call each other up and say, hey, do you want to work together? It just doesn't really work that way. And artists who tend to want to do work like that, there aren't really good models to look at on how to do it. So I've spent a lot of my life trying to build the infrastructure to do it. And I take that as important and as satisfying to my life as an artist as anything I ever make. It is a form of making, just kind of is kind of behind the scenes. For example, I'm in my 4th year as what's titled as the Artist at Large at the Northwestern University's McCormick School of Engineering. And again, why should an engineering department have an artist for 4 years roaming the halls? And I really know why, and I'm pushing hard on that. And to wrap up this little intro about that, I want to just draw your attention to the top left-hand corner there, because the last component I love to stress about this part of what I do, beyond being engaged day to day for years, I'm really a big advocate for artists and scientists dialoguing publicly. And I want it all to be seen. And because between an artist and scientist, one thing that I ponder quite a bit is how we fall into misinterpretations or cliches about what each other does. And of course, like anything obvious but harder said than done but how do you get over that through dialogue and engagement? So not only do I think there's great work to be done just by an artist and scientist hearing the types of questions they ask, being around each other every day, but then to put that in a public setting. And so I've done a number of talks with various scientific fields where I think they are pushing at some very troubling ethical questions, but don't quite have the apparatus to ask those questions. Of course, the humanities do. We have a long lineage of asking those very questions. So for example, synthetic biologist, I've been really invested in at Northwestern. If there is a future of designer babies or bringing extinct creatures back to existence, it will be because of synthetic biology. As long as the curing of all kinds of genetic diseases, they're much more equipped to talk about the genetic disease, and they're much less equipped to talk about bringing a mammoth back and where would you put it. Those are different questions, and I think the humanities are the ones to ask them. As Julia mentioned, more recently, I've moved into some new formats, film in particular. I've kind of going through for me, a shocking stage of my life as an artist, which is I've paused my sculptural practice for at least 5 years, which is, I can't tell you how painful that is for me, but it's because the research is asking something different of me. And that has meant thinking about film in my process. I've never made a film, I don't know what I'm doing, but I actually love it. I like being uncomfortable in that way. I've made 2 films. It's actually gonna end up being a trilogy. This is a still from the first one, second one, which just completed during COVID. I've begun the script on the 3rd film. So when it's all said and done, this trilogy is gonna be this big project that encapsulates the next level of research and engaging with all these scientists. Also working on my first book. Again, I don't know what I'm doing. I've never written a book before, but I'm all in because the research is sort of demanding I go there. I'm excited to do it. Even the book is hard to categorize. It's a artist and an art historian writing a book about science. And where to put that on the shelf, I don't know, and that's what I love about it. So anyway, those are just some background things I wanted to share with you. But what I wanted to do today, and this is largely in part from meeting Julia and our growing friendship. As she mentioned, we're both Texans. I grew up in San Antonio, she grew up in Houston. But there's something that we share in common that came out pretty quickly, which is that we're both, you used to be, I still am, I'll let you speak for yourself, but big Smiths fans, Smiths and Morrissey fans. I mean, very big. And engaging with Julia at this level of pure, sincere, no judgment, absolutely all-in fandom has been so nourishing to my soul and my heart. And what's our favorite B-side? What live recordings do you have or don't have, et cetera? Like stuff like that. I'm sure everybody's got that thing in their life. Whether you know the Smiths or Morrissey or not, it's not beside the point. I think being a fan of Morrissey today has become more problematic than the past. But I want to talk about that a little bit today, about what it means to be a fan, and how much I actually invest in that posture in the world. But as it's been clear in our discussions about the Smiths, the thing that, whether you know the music or not, the thing that I hope everybody has in their own life is that it's a language of passion. It's a language of commitment, of being invested in something that I'm not embarrassed to say is borderline devotional. And I mean that in the loving, expansive way of that term, not in a blind way. So it's inspired me to kind of do a talk that I haven't ever quite done before, which is to talk about my research, my tactics that have evolved for 25 years as a research artist, but their origins are so tied with my much older lineage of being a fan, just being a fan. I take being a fan really serious. I have this motto that whenever I cross this borderline where I can say out loud, I'm your fan, I promise it is a lifetime commitment. I promise I will be your fan till the end. And it doesn't mean I will let go of my critical apparatus at all. Like I said, Morrissey asks me to ask some very tough questions about what it means to be a fan 25 years later. But that's okay, because that's what I want my fandom to do. I want it to push me, but it's also a mode of research is what I want this talk to sort of be about today. And I say that too, and I don't use these words lightly. I think being a fan has a moral and an ethical dimension to it. And I just sort of alluded to it here about what does long-term commitment look like to the artistry of someone else. And as a young artist, still trying to figure out how do you move to the next stage of making something, it was really useful to me to realize that I had a vocabulary in place since I was a little boy about what it meant to be a fan, and that I had certain skill sets and attitudes about the world and materials and ideas that were all in. Like I'm just sort of an all-in kind of person. And I realized that being an artist requires a similar thing. And And so there's a moral and an ethics that I hope comes out in the talk today. Because I'm an artist, but also just a human being who's interested in the ways we invent to care for each other and uphold each other. And fandom to me has been the language to offer that path. So I'm gonna make one final reference to Morrissey, and then and then I'll move on. Otherwise, it could spiral into some other type of talk. But I just want to say this about him. I just want to show you, I want to share with you my favorite lyric from my favorite album. It's so easy to laugh. It's so easy to hate. It takes guts to be gentle and kind. I want to tell you that, growing up fatherless in South Texas, where one's masculinity had one criteria, which was how good were you at football, that sentiment landed hard, and it was completely upending all the notions of what I thought toughness was and should be in the context of the way I grew up, but I think more broadly for a lot of men. And when I first encountered that lyric, it was transformative. It was a worldview. Like that is my research standard. I realized early on that whatever he's getting at there, which I think is very obvious, it's the most punk rock, it's the most radical notion I could have heard as a 14-year-old, trying to navigate other feelings in my life, especially about this maleness and toughness. And I think I'm so thankful for him for that, whatever he's become. That's what I mean about testing a fandom. I'll never forget that he gave that to me and many others. And it did, it changed my life. And I want to put it up here because I just don't usually talk about his influence in my work, but also that it's a research strategy. And that's what I hope I can tease out a bit today. So for me, fandom comes along with these other things. It's a form of research. It's a form of sustained meditation. And even that in our time becomes quite political in a shorter attention span era. What does it mean to be a fan for 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years? It changes, the dynamic changes like any relationship would. But it's also it's a commitment. As I said, once I'm your fan, I'm your fan. Maybe it's gonna get rocky, fine, but I'm gonna be there. Empathy, which is very important to me in my models of artwork and being an artist. Generosity, love, and gift giving. And I wanted to put gift giving at the end there just to sort of put an exclamation point on this, because I think when we talk about fandom often, especially in 2022, I have a lot to say about where I think some of the darker sides of fandom have gone in our time, which maybe we can get to later. But my point is that fandom to me is not a selfish act. It was the beginning of a reciprocal act of gift giving. When I received those lyrics, as I have many since, poems, artworks, et cetera, in my life, there's a sensibility that the fan is a taker. It's there to be consumed. But what I want to argue to you, at least in these other models of being a fan, is that it's the opening call of gift exchange. It's asking of, at least the way I internalized it, that as a model moving forward, as a young artist, trying to find, what is art's function in the world? What can I expect from it? This offered me an early model, which was, could I give something back to the great art that I felt had been given to me? And so all the works I'm going to show you today are going to focus on those earliest days of my practice that were caught up with this problem of being given something that I didn't know if I could ever repay, but I would try in my initial gesture as an art maker. I certainly don't think I succeeded in all of them, this spirit has continued today. I don't know that I always succeed, but like I said, I like to try, and I think that great art asks us to do that. So with that said, just one other little caveat about the type of talk is, I'm going to unpack the process of being a fan just as much as I'm going to show you any artworks. And I say that because in my work, I love the things I make, don't get me wrong. Like I love being an artist and making things, but I don't prioritize the end point any more than I do the beginning or the middle. The whole process of getting to that object is the art. And so today, in opportunities like this, I think I can spread out a bit and tell you some of the background stories to the things I've made over the years. And I do that because, well, one, as I said, I don't really prioritize the end object any more than I do the beginning, but also because I hope it's useful to any young artist here, or to everybody, but especially artists, because my God, this problem never goes away, which is, what do you make as an artist, and what's worthy of your time? What's worthy of 10 years of your life, depending on how much investment you're giving to any object. It's a big problem. I still have it every year. I'm like, okay, what's the thing? What's going to be worth it? And so I want to show you some of the process behind these objects, because I hope it reveals some of that. So if there are questions later about that, I'd be happy to dig into it. So for me, though, the place, oh yeah, one other thing is that along with that is the site of fandom. And I'm going to spend a little time up front. I'm hopefully going to cover 3 important places of displaying my fandom that were equally important to the fandom themselves. And for me, it has to start with a honky tonk. Because, and I've learned to not assume everyone knows what a honky tonk is over the years. Julie and I it's in our blood. It's easy to conjure if you don't know. Just imagine a dive bar, the seediest dive bar you can imagine, but it's playing country and Western music. And you've got a honky tonk. When I was a little boy, my mother actually ran a honky tonk. And on the weekends when she didn't have anyone to watch me, she would take me with her on her shifts, hand me a bunch of coins, and set me down by the jukebox. And that was my babysitter for the evening. And I probably saw a lot of things I should not have seen, but God, I'm so glad I have those memories, because it was the first time that I saw something that I could later articulate, which was the role of art to say something factual and important about lived experience. And as I learned, as I picked the various songs on the jukebox, I'm just going to put a few images up because I want to really give a sense of the physicality of the space, because the music was so influential, but the materiality of a honky tonk, the smell of old alcohol, the sweat on the bar, drunken people trying to stay upright as they're dancing. But the physicality of the materiality on the walls, it really impacted me in the steep way that is so clear in the work I do today. But the jukebox is really, and I would say too, like in this idea of what can serve as maybe unorthodox research strategies, I would say the look in that woman's eyes is a research strategy for me, because I wanted to know what in the world did those eyes mean? And that's why the jukebox became so important. And I like to argue that, it's something that's, I hope everybody knows what it is. It's not a given. Maybe you've encountered one yourself anymore. So definitely a technology that's dated at this point. But my interaction with it, I want to argue to you that these are encyclopedias of human knowledge, and a very particular type of knowledge that I found as meaningful as the Library of Alexandria. It is that rich and deep of an investigation of human behavior, especially emotions. And I like to call it, I have this concept of accidental poetry that I'm going to show some other examples of today, that I became just so enamored with this object, this babysitter I had that was filled with, you could argue the sum total of human emotions up to that point through every one of those songs. But I was equally mesmerized by the labels. And without even hearing a song, if you just read those labels, each one, as dramatic of a song title as you can imagine a country song to be, and just read them sequentially, it was my first encounter with poetry. It truly was. It was the weirdest, most sad, beautiful poem I'd ever read, and I became quite obsessed with it. So I really feel that these are untapped, or at least, I wanted to tap into this as a site of research. What did this thing contain that could offer a pathway as an artist? And as I said, I started to learn that the songs that I was hearing precisely described what I was seeing. The type of loss, heartbreak, forgiveness, redemption, hopefulness, it was all right there in the song through the lyrics. And it was exactly what I saw playing out on the dance floor. This was a great lesson to learn, that art could have this correlation in this documentary sense that really gave me a way to understand the world. But equally important to me was the record itself. And go on and on about the record. I've done a lot of work in response to it over the years. I used to actually became a DJ later, not just a 7-year-old DJ at the jukebox, but a breakthrough I had in my own life as an artist was how to take the skill set of the DJ and find the sculptural equivalent of all of those techniques that I had learned, like scratching, for example, or mixing songs together. But the record itself is also like the jukebox. It is for me, a form of researching and engagement with the world. And I have you don't need to read, I know it's a long, unruly list. You don't have to read it all. Maybe I'll just point your attention to the word B-sides there. These are all things that I've sort of unpacked over the years, done projects in response to. But I want you to think about the record, and in particular, I have a whole kind of theory of the B-side that's been very important to me. And the B-side, again, I hope everybody knows what that is. It's a format that is also becoming extinct with digital culture. But when I would watch those records, often it was a mechanical arm that would pull the 45 out, put it down and play. And I would just be mesmerized watching it turn. But I was equally taken with what was underneath. The song that for whatever reason, the artist didn't think was the one worthy of your attention. And it became this interesting place to think conceptually that the B-side was this shadowy realm of what exactly? Why couldn't I hear that one too? Why was the record company putting all the pressure on the single, the A-side? And so sculpturally, I've explored this quite a bit, thinking about what are the equivalent B-sides of my sculptures. So anyway, I want to point your attention to that because I'll probably bring it up again. And all this to say, this sort of intro here to tell you that I wanted my fandom to enhance my ability to listen, to see, to think, to empathize, all the list I put up earlier. And I wanted to raise my listening to this standard, that my heart and the artists themselves, that their heart might depend on the intensity of my ability to listen. And I love this image. The work I'm currently doing about the history of the heartbeat, I'm not going to go into so much today, but this is a picture that I found in my research that I just love. This is a physician listening to a record with a stethoscope. And that is a research strategy too. That's the level of listening I want. I wanted to hear the singer's heart beating, even if that wasn't what was recorded on the record. It was the song instead. So that's also just something I just love, the oddness of listening to a record with a stethoscope, as if that's some pathway to some hidden knowledge that's embedded in it. So it became pretty clear early on that I kept picking certain songs over and over. And it was Patsy Cline. And, you know, if anyone's going to give Morrissey a run for their money in my fandom, it's Patsy. And it started at a very early age. And I started to wonder later, why? Well, what was it about her and her voice and what she was saying that somehow struck some deep truth, felt true about it to me? And to try to answer that, I want to just tell you a quick little story about her. The title of the talk, Patsy's Scar. If you look at the picture up in the right-hand corner, and then look at the other two pictures, there's something quite different here as far as the way she's got her hair. And, at any time in history, especially in her time to be a female artist in any genre, but especially in country western, to be one of the first female headliners of the Grand Ole Opry, that just didn't happen. And she did some incredible things breaking ground. But she recorded a song, I hope everyone knows, called I Fall to Pieces. And it was her first really big crossover hit. It's an all-time classic. But in the build-up to promoting it, to push it, to get it on various playlists, she was in a terrible car accident. And her head went through the front windshield. Nobody thought she was going to make it, and the paramedics arrived. And it was very traumatic. She also damaged her ribs very extensively. But Patsy, being who she is and who she was, within 6 weeks was back out on stage on crutches at the Grand Ole Opry, and was determined to record her follow-up song, which happened to be Crazy, her biggest song of all. But something happened, which she started noticing, of course, as she's still recovering from her injuries. The particular notes that she had to hit while she was singing Crazy forced this, pressure on her forehead and her chest, of course. And the pain became unbearable. And she also had a big TV appearance that was scheduled that she didn't want to cancel. And so for the rest of her life, she had to wear wigs and very odd bandanas that were both, a fashion statement, but really something else. She needed tight pressure on her wound to counteract the force as she was singing outward. She needed to literally be held together in these images. And you would never know from those images. And that top image over there with the horns over her head and the gun in the back, God, and knowing this, the story I just told you, I hope that really resonates with you about the power on display here, that you would never know in one sense, but in this other one that I'm arguing, I hope. And so, for the rest of her short life, she died not long after this in a plane crash. But those images, when I started thinking more deeply about Patsy, that I'd already been moved by her music, and when I started researching more, I came across this performance. Something about her bandana just seemed off and odd. It led down this path to Patsy's Scar, which is, again, I would argue, a type of unorthodox research strategy about what's under that bandana. And what do you need to do as an artist to sort of understand what's actually going on there. And so with that in mind, I want to share with you one of my early works that I want to rewind back to my gift-giving premise earlier. And as an initial way to start out as an artist, if everything holds that I just told you, as it did for me early on, then I started coming up with, trying to think of ideas of artworks that could address something that I felt those artists gave me. And so what I did was I took her single, I Fall to Pieces, 45 RPM record, and like I was a giant living record player, I took an X-Acto knife and I just slowly started carving along the outer edge of the record, almost like, peeling an apple. And it became this deep meditative process because I was determined to go slow enough that the thread never broke. It was impossible in the end for it not to break occasionally. I figured out a way to put it back together, but I did not stop till I got to the center of the record. And I made this giant thread of her voice, singing about falling to pieces over a love affair. But to suggest that the thing that could hold her together is also her art, even though it's also an expression of what's unraveling her. And that could I give her back and say, as this gift, this fandom as a gift, this gift giving as fandom, here's a way to stitch that scar. You did it already in your own art. I've spooled this thread around a spool and a needle that I've made of fool's gold, and it's very, very deliberate. Of course, I hope that maybe it's obvious I'm deliberate about things, but fool's gold is this fascinating substance I've used often in my work. And fool's gold is called fool's gold because it looks like gold, but chemically it doesn't pass the test. It's something invisible inside of it that doesn't give it its value that we would give actual gold. And it's funny to think, but I often think that fool's gold is this mineral in the world that we've given a complex history around, that it looks like gold, but not really. So we're not going to give it the full value, even though it looks like it. It's sort of like performing its goldness, so to speak, every time. But it's got something inside of it that's not quite up to par based on chemical issues. So I wanted to wrap her voice around a material that was also sort of in tension with what it looked like outwardly and what it was internally. And so that piece, I did a series of works about Patsy's scar. I'm going to just share a few more with you. And Julia mentioned a project that I'm not going to give broader context to about my early works that were performative. I call them actions, but they were these types of performances like switching out the light bulbs on the neighborhood block that I grew up on with a slightly higher wattage light bulb. And I did many of these, over 50 over several years. One of them has to do with Patsy. So that's a little context, but I'm just going to show you the piece out of the context of the bigger actions. And after the story I just told you about Honky Tonk, maybe this will be obvious why I did this. But so this action involved revisiting that honky tonk decades after I had last entered it and performing this action. I've chosen you to make this covenant. Altered sound of seashell, jukebox, Patsy Cline, the sea. And if anybody wants to do this, please feel free to go do it. It's an open action anyone can do anytime. Hide as large a seashell as you can in your front pocket. Find your nearest honky tonk. Walk in alone. Choose any song by Patsy Cline on the jukebox and stand as close as you can to the speaker for the duration of the song. Walk out alone, give the seashell to someone, or lay it on the shore and walk away. And not only did I perform that action, but I made a sculptural version of it too. And this piece is called I Wish the Ocean Sounded More Like Patsy Cline, which is what I was trying to do by changing the sound of a seashell by putting it on top of a jukebox. But I took it a step further, and I gathered seashells, these particular ones I love called apple blossoms, because they look like they're blushing. They have this really beautiful pink hue on them. And I broke them in pairs, and one side of the pair, I put it in front of playing Patsy Cline on really big speaker system for 48 hours at a time, hoping somehow the sound had slightly changed. I then took it, returned it to the shore, and one of the seashells I used to make this piece that you see her name spelled out. And then the other seashell, I mean, these are lots of seashells, I should say. Used it to make my own sand, to then make here's a detail of, it's a really detailed handiwork there. It's hard to tell in that other image. But I took those, Patsy imbued seashells and made my own sand and made my own sandcastles and photographed them as they were taken back out to sea. This is also an early example of how I was trying to experiment with A-sides and B-sides. It was an artwork that had its component, which was this one. The words to all the love songs start making sense when you've gone away. How are you doing? You're doing good? Okay. So I hope I've offered some new pathway into Patsy's brilliance. And now I want to turn your attention to the other sort of alternative research strategy that's been crucial to my life, has been a lifelong obsession with the Guinness Book of World Records. And this book, oh my God, I can go on about it like I did with the jukebox. And also I would put it under this category of accidental poetry. It is, like I argued, the jukebox is a sort of an encyclopedia of sorrow. I think of this as this very human book of the longing to be remembered. And the Guinness Book of World Records has been released every year for decades. I buy it every year to get the latest updates. These are two of my earlier copies. But the strange thing about this book, and I would argue that's quite beautiful, is that it's all examples of, as I said, humans who want to be remembered. Like they did something that no one else did. And one of the #1 ways a person can get into the Guinness Book of World Records is to invent your own record, which I would argue, as I'm about to show you, it has blossomed into this beautiful artwork, and I really mean it, it's an artwork that has sort of been evolving without much intentionality that anybody's trying to make it an artwork, but it just is. And it has this great relationship to things that are important in my work, between language, process, materials, and this deep search for meaning. And as I said, the #1 way to get in the Guinness Book of World Records is to make up your own record, which has produced some of the weirdest language you're ever going to come across, because thousands of people have sat down and thought, has anyone pushed an orange for a mile down the road with their nose? No, so I'm gonna go do it. and it produced this, as I said, this compendium of the human desire to just be remembered. And there are many records that I'm sure they get all the attention. I hope you know some of these. These are some of the most coveted ones. And I love these, don't get me wrong, but this is not the interesting stuff to me. It gets weirder once you dig in. And again, in the context of fandom and research, this was crucial in my development, thinking about how to research something. I just want to show you some of the records that are just bizarre because they also happen to produce beautiful visual objects. So this is the most number of people simultaneously hula hooping. 4,483 people. And look at that image it produced. It's just, if an artist did any of these, I wouldn't question that it was an artwork. And yet these people are doing this every day without that connotation. I'll just show you a few more. The world's biggest national flag. Just find that so beautiful, like the art history you could talk about with that image is fascinating. Then, very odd, the most number of people applying a facial mask for 10 minutes. How much more specific can you get about a thing? And yet it's a mass work of art, in my opinion. And I'll just share one more with you that I find so intriguing because of the visual. This one is constantly getting beaten, by the way. The most spoons on a human body, 50 magnetized spoons. Think of again, at the level of performance art, if an artist attempted something like this with spoons or other objects, I don't think any of us would question the sincerity of it or that it's art. And yet, that's not how this is contextualized. But I have 3 favorite records, 3 favorites. One, and I'm going to tell you one that I made a sculpture from. The first one is the man who holds the world record for holding the most world records. The meta-ness of that is really profound. I would argue he's one of our great unrecognized artists and also an incredible athlete because of the types of things he puts his body through. He's constantly upping it. But the key is to invent. And that's why I think he's so interesting to think about as an artist. Here's some of the language of some of the records he's so just listen to this from your poetic ear. Banana slicing with the sword on a slack line. Most sliced in 1 minute. Bananas thrown by Bibbin Larkin. Or party popper popping, most in 30 seconds. These are cucumber cutting from a person's mouth, most in 1 minute. It's just, it's so beautiful to me. And again, it's just the human expression to be remembered, that you were the best at something at one point in life. So my second favorite world record, and I'll talk about this more tomorrow in Julia's class, but the oldest person to ever live, I'm gonna just tantalizingly leave that out there to you. I have a lot to say about her, about Jean, and as you can see, her advice for a long life kind of flies in the face of what you might think. But I'll move on quickly here, but I just wanna give you some context. To cross the century, it's a big deal. To cross 110 years old, you've now entered a new category. It's called super centenarians. To cross 115, I think there have been 10 people ever. No one has crossed 120 except her. It's truly an anomaly. It just doesn't happen. It's a bizarre thing, and I think the knowledge she held is worth remembering in a very important way. And again, I'll talk about it more tomorrow. But the piece I want to show you that I made a sculptural response to is a man named Roy Sullivan, and he holds a very painful world record. The most times somebody has been struck by lightning. And to be struck by lightning one time is incredibly unlikely. 2 times, 3 times, we're now in odds that pale, like the lottery pales in comparison to the odds. Roy was struck 7 times. And this is one of his hats that blew off his head when the electricity left his body. But Roy is a fascinating story and figure to think about, not unrelated to Patsy's story, because as I dug in deeper into all of this, to be struck by lightning is traumatic. It's emotionally, psychologically, and physically. The heat, the intense heat, and the exiting of the electricity exits through your fingertips, your toes, often causing severe damage. The depression rates are off the scales for lightning strike victims. And go on. The point is that he lived a very painful life, and he was a park ranger, and you would think this might explain why he was struck so many times, but he was struck on vacation in another state. It truly is odd to think about what was, a magnetic personality, what he had that made him so unusual. But you could also argue that, like Patsy, he was a survivor. He really kept going, except that he didn't. And when I discovered how he finally passed away, it really further complicated the story. But he ends up taking his own life with a shotgun over a failed love affair. And I found that so fascinating. He was a religious man, and you would think, what is God trying to tell you with 7 strikes? Either you're the luckiest or unluckiest person in the world. Either you're a living symbol of survival, or you're being punished. I don't know. I don't know how he processed it all. But regardless, this godlike event didn't kill him, but love did. And that is really what I pondered about him. And in the sculptural response, I wanted to show you these incredible images of the way the electricity moves through the body, producing these things called lightning scars. The path it's taking literally boils your blood, your arteries. They form burns on your body. Happens in natural settings as well. And I became very interested in this material called fulgurites in relation to researching about Roy. And a fulgurite is the physical residue of the lightning scars I just showed you. This is the path the electricity takes as it's moving through sand, literally melting the sand into glass. For collectors, these are highly coveted objects because of how they're made. This is physicality, physical residue of lightning. But here's a really unusual feature about them, is that they're usually underground, and the search for them often means you're going to break it as you're looking for it. It's very fragile. And so to do a work about Roy, I took it upon myself to find as many fulgurites as I could myself. And it became this, like with carving that record, it became this very meditative process of, can I do this without breaking it? Can I put my hands in slowly enough to lift it up without losing some of these branches? Inevitably, it didn't work. Each time it broke some way. But I did acquire enough because I wanted to make this sculpture for him. It's called My Magnetic Flaw. And it's an hourglass, it's a 7-minute custom blown hourglass that has been filled with the ground up fulgurites. Instead of regular sand, it's lightning. It's the residue of lightning. And I sourced the wood from the park that he worked at for most of his life. And it's, little laser engraved. I wanted to use heat to make this little poem I wrote for him on the top and the bottom of it. But the stipulation for this piece is that anytime it's ever shown, it has to be turned every 7 minutes. It's never done. It's still counting down 7 more minutes, 7 more minutes. And watching it, watching the sand move through the funnel is this alternative way of taking the initial heat and energy of that lightning strike and turning it into something really delicate and a marker of buying a little more time. Each time, just trying to give him a few more minutes before he made that final decision. But watching it, and I'm sure everybody can picture in your head the little indentation that the sand starts to make as it gathers enough from the bottom, and watching it, a very different type of dent being formed rather than this violent one. It was a much more subtle one. So for the sake of time, so that Julie and I have time to discuss, I'm going to just tell you about one more work. If you're interested, I have others to show you, but also going to talk to class tomorrow. But I'll end with one other work that brings us a little more up to date and has something to do with the work I've been doing with the SETI scientist. So I wanted to just get something in that is more of a direct result of this more recent engagement of research that I've done. So let me just move ahead here. So as I'm sure many of you caught wind of, I hope the recent launch of the James Webb Telescope. It's a game changer. It's your generation's Hubble telescope. I hope you know that and will appreciate it in the same way. I certainly am. But one of Hubble's glorious contributions to human knowledge is that as of today, James Webb is going to overtake it, but as of right now, it has imaged the oldest starlight in the universe. It can see back to roughly 13.2 billion years. I mean, this is really stunning when you sort of mind warping when you think about that we're seeing starlight that began its journey to us 13 billion years ago. We're just now seeing it, meaning that all those stars are long gone. But it did, and it very famously, it just randomly picked a spot in the sky. There's nothing special about that spot. And they just let the lens capture light for, I forget how long, but a long time. And this image appeared in it, meaning everywhere you look, it's just, the richness is overwhelming. But there's something about it that really intrigued me in the discussions we have about telescopes. And that it's always this act of us looking out. We're looking out. Seems obvious why, but each generation is pushing out a little further. James Webb, in fact, one of its stated missions is to image the first starlight that ever flickered on in the universe. Just like, please absorb that, that we are all likely going to be alive the day NASA releases the first starlight to ever flicker on in the universe. With all the harm we can cause each other as humans, that we can also do that. Still gives me some hope about what we're capable of. But the thing being around these SETI scientists that really started to resonate was the act is looking out. We're always looking that way. And I wanted to merge my particular fandom with live album covers, which I'll show you in a minute, with a perspective reversal, which is how do we imagine what's looking at us? And what would they see? Because if their James Webb telescope is pointing our way, we're also going to look like that, heading back towards them. And one of the things that the James Webb is going to do is this beautiful new technique we've invented in our search for life in the universe. First, we got to find the planets, and then we begin other processes. But essentially, I mean, it's more complicated than I'm about to say, but it's this really beautiful, simple idea, which is what happens when one thing passes in front of another. And every time a planet from a distant system crosses in front of its home star, there's a little dip in the light coming to us from that star. But we're talking incredibly small amounts of dip in light. If you think about the Earth in front of the sun, can you imagine how little light we actually block out? That's how powerful the telescopes have become. So much so that we can detect that dip and determine not only that there's a planet there, but its size, its orbital period, if it's rocky or watery. It's stunning. If we do confirm life in the next 50 years, it might very likely be from this method. So it's important that I think we all know that. Anyway, what I want to show you is a piece I made in response to thinking about this. It's called "Survival Does Not Lie in the Heavens," and I'm gonna come back to it in a second so you can read that. But just to wrap up my fandom and these alternate ways of research, album design has been also a very important part of my artistic education, and in particular, live album covers. Again, it's a format that's maybe going by the wayside a bit, but I hope you can conjure in your head. If not, I'm showing you. There's a very particular aesthetic to a live album cover. It's generally the singer performing with the dramatic stage lights behind them. I'll come back to that again. But what I did was, using my mother and grandmother's record collection, starting there, it expanded out. But I became mesmerized with the background lights. Oddly, they look so similar to early NASA photography. And I became quite enamored with what was going on behind the singer. So I began a project where, well over 500 albums, where I digitally removed everything except the stage lights that were illuminating the singer. And if you think about my earlier point about the transit method of a planet moving in front of its host star, I want you to think about that singer standing in front of that light. Here's another example. I'm showing you the original album and then the work I've done to get it back to just the stage light. And I made this vast archive of stage lights from all of these different artists, all now deceased artists, all gospel, blues, and jazz artists. And this image that you're looking at is actually all those stage lights. It's modeled after the Hubble Space Telescope, but instead of this idea I just mentioned about this perspective shift, that along with our sun and all of the stars around us that are heading somewhere right now, we're going to be somebody's alien too. The way a photon works means that that light and the light that illuminated Jimi Hendrix 40 years ago, those photons are still on their way somewhere right now as I'm talking to you. They're on their way. And theoretically, if you had a strong enough telescope, could you not flesh out the stage lights that illuminated Marvin Gaye one random night in the 70s as much as you could the sun itself? And what I like to think about is that if you keep going down that road of resolution capability, could you start to distinguish, Billie Holiday's moving across time and space? Somewhere she's still alive, the concert is not over because the light is still getting there. Each of these lights represents a different musician. As I said, all sourced from different albums. very difficult to get them off the original albums. But the point I want to make is that, like Cash's figure there, it's like the transit method. His body moved in front of that light. And those photons that illuminated him that night, wherever they're arriving, if something had the resolution capabilities, could they not make out his silhouette too? Meaning that some physical residue of his body is also embedded in the light. So the piece is the celebration of that somewhere these concerts are still going on. All of these people are still alive in some sense, just as the Hubble imagery of those lights, those stars are real to us even though they're long gone. Even this picture, there weren't, Billie Holiday I didn't talk about, but she's also very important to me. But even the granular light source behind her is embedded in the overall image as well. It's hard to tell in these images. But okay, I know I've gone past our time and I'm excited to talk to Julia about all this. And thank you for listening.
Is my thing on? Can everyone hear me? Yes. Great. Thank you, Dario. That was amazing.
Thank you.
I want to, first of all, just say that it's so special to have an artist give a brand new talk, because so often, and I know artists are very busy, but it is often the case. I mean, I've been to artist talks where, let's say it's 2019, and the PPT on the desktop says like, presentation 2014, and like it's just, and then it is this very same thing again and again and again. So it's really special that you did something new for us. I have a million questions, and I feel like probably people in the audience do too, but I guess I want to start, well, where do I want to start? I guess I want to start with one of your opening comments about how you like to dwell in the things that make people uncomfortable. I want to talk a little bit more about discomfort, perhaps, and have you expand on responses to your work, because sometimes people have expressed discomfort, perhaps, and I think part of, the two responses that maybe make people uncomfortable. One is that your sincerity is often seen as, I don't know, is surprising and that is a source, I think, of discomfort for some. So that's one, the kind of openly uncynical approach that you have, which I, of course, love, and it's something that we've bonded about because I am such a fan as well, and I love being a fan. But also, I think that people can be suspicious about your materials, like the fact that when you say you're using like prehistoric fossilized bones, or that you've specially carved an album with, that looks very impossible, that you do what you say you've done. And that makes people, I think sometimes your work does make people nervous around questions of authenticity in materiality. So maybe if we could just start there.
Okay. Yeah, they're connected. It's a great question because they're connected. Well, this is an answer I've given before. I want to keep saying things I haven't said, but it is important to say this point on this question, which is lying is boring. That is just a base motto I think we should have in life, but it's certainly one that I take to heart in my work. And what I mean is that to do it is so much more interesting. Not just, I hope, to a viewer, but to myself. As I hope I illustrated, what do I need to do to earn Patsy's respect? In a sense that I can, make a piece like that. And I do. I have a motto in my studio, which is, what do I need to do to earn the respect of this material? I look at it every day. And sometimes that means take a month to unspool that record. Go as slow as you need to go to do it. So I think on principle, it's important to say, at least for me, it's way more interesting to do it than to have lied about it. I also take great pride that it's a source of innovation technically, because I didn't, show you a lot of other works that I often pride myself that there's no one to consult on how to make the thing I'm about to make. And that's partly because of the odd question I'm asking, and that I take a great joy in, like any maker or engineer would, like how do I do that? How do I make that happen? I just take great pleasure from it. So now, I remember someone I admired told me once that she didn't care if I was lying or not. And it was a fellow artist who told me that. And I was really taken back by that response. And I think she was even implying that she kind of hoped I was lying, because to her that made it weirder. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think to have actually done it makes it more weird. Yeah. So that was interesting insight. But so my point is that if anyone asks, I tell them my philosophy. Lying's boring. To do it's way more interesting. Merged with the set of particular ethical and moral questions I'm asking to myself, which puts great emphasis and weight on doing it. So for me, it doesn't even cross my mind to make it up. It just is the way I do it. If it's interesting conceptually, like I give my friend the benefit of the doubt that there was something interesting about making it up. But I had a great talk with her about it, and I wondered if it was more a symptom of our time, back to your sincerity question, that we live in an age where everyone's assuming they're getting tricked at some level about something every day through the manipulation of information or images or whatever. There's some thing hardwired in us that technology is increasing about we can fake it. Deep fakes are very worrisome, and I don't need to go over the disinformation campaign in the Ukraine right now, or even in our own last election, to prod, I'm sure a sympathetic audience, but to prod us to challenge that our standards of being lied to might be the sand, it might be moving in the sand, and what comes with that. So as an artist, I know where I stand on this point, and I would never lie in the work about it, just because it's just too intertwined with other foundational premises I hold.
Well, I guess it brings me to, that fact that sometimes it takes months or years, that the process is really extended, makes me want to ask you more also about duration and the sense that you have this extremely sustained focus. Like it goes back to your fandom, like, okay, fine, I've made that commitment, it's a lifelong commitment. How then, do your interests ever wane? I mean, you have, in a way, like you did work about war for 10 years,
Yeah.
And that and then your attention did shift. So I guess the question is not only about the moment where you decide I'm all in, but what happens when you kind of ease away?
Yeah. The other, that question I presented about artists struggling, well, where do you begin? And then on the opposite end is when do you end it? Or when do you know a work is done? And I have to go by instinct on it. With the war work, I didn't realize after 9/11 that we were about to enter the longest war of the country's history. But I had said early on that, along with a host of other questions I was asking, I pondered, what did it mean when your country's at war as an artist? And should an artist extend the same engagement that soldiers on the front line are doing? It was a question I asked. I just never had asked that question. I didn't know the answer to it. I said, at least in those early years, it's like, okay, I'm gonna stick with this. Didn't know, as I said, it'd be over the longest war we've ever been in. But 10 years, I gave myself over to that topic. And I'm doing it again with, I said I'm pausing my sculptural practice for at least 5 years. to work on film and write a book. I don't know. It's one of those hard abstract questions about when you know it's over. I wish I could be more precise about it. And maybe it's never over. Like what we were talking about Ukraine earlier, every one of those feelings and questions I asked about 9/11 all rushed back in. That I feel again some hint that I'm not done, that I should re-engage with that on some level. So maybe every ending is just tentative. As I'm getting older, maybe that's what I'm realizing.
Yeah, that makes sense, for sure. Well, maybe we can go back to Patsy Cline for a second, because I was struck anew when you were showing the piece of the kind of Patsy imbued seashells, like playing music for seashells, right? Then grinding them and returning them in the form of sand. There is a sense that for you, materials have our agency, that the seashell isn't just like a passive conduit, but that it itself, is responsive. And so I'm just curious to hear you say more about how you think about the way that a seashell or a matchstick or, so much of this work that you do with objects is about having a conversation with stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, but yeah, I guess there is a whole kind of body of knowledge and philosophy about new materialism, and some of it is based in feminist theory and queer theory. Some of it is going back to indigenous epistemologies about the blurred lines between inanimate and animate. But it seems like you have your own, you've come to that yourself, not necessarily through those philosophies. So where did you, let's just talk about what it means for you to think that a seashell is like listening to Patsy Cline and then holding it.
Well, as you said in your intro, this term I came up with for myself, a materialist poet, felt like it was getting closer to something that I was after. And I have to say something about language here, because the reason I came up with materialist poet is because I've never seen this as an official form of synesthesia, so I don't know that it is, but language and materials have always come together. They come along with the thoughts, just come along together when I think about something. So much so that I rarely start a sculptural project before I have sorted out the title and the material list, even the processes. It's an unusual way for an object maker to make something, to let language come first. It's not the thing you tack on at the end. Untitled mixed media dimensions variable is something I'll never use. Because I look at it as a form of poetry that is my doorway to the material. And so I have to sort of comment on that they just, to explore materials is to explore language and vice versa to me. It just always felt natural to do that. But you're right, the theories, the great scholarship written about all of these ideas about materials, I wasn't aware of them early on. And I look at it as back to the point about the honky tonk, that there was something intuitive about the physicality of the site as much as the music. Maybe one other layer I should add in here is that after my mother stopped working at the honky tonk, she began the next 20 years of her life working at a hospice, and eventually worked her way up to being the director of a hospice, which was also very much part of my life. And just as the honky tonk left a mark on my upbringing, so did watching bodies withering away over and over. But this deep relationship to saying goodbye to a loved one, often in their bodies, decaying away, And just like the honky tonk left its mark on me as far as the smells and the texture of the room, being in various rooms with hospice patients, even my grandmother, when she also went on to hospice, just came into it. It was something intuitive to me that the stakes of life and death were somehow intertwined with all of the details of the materiality in the room. So, I'm not saying anything that those other theories have not probably illuminated in their own way, but, learning that as a little boy just became natural. And so I've always wanted to uphold those standards through my sculptural practice that, for example, dealing with 9/11, one of the most complicated questions I ever asked was, can I use human remains? But literally use bone dust in the artwork. And I've pushed on the boundaries of maybe the uncomfortable point you were making earlier too. But it's because I early on, the honky tonk and the hospice, it got so intertwined in my mind that to honor those moments meant some truth to the material in a sculptural sense, but also in this emotional sense. That if I'm going to talk about death in its actual physical reality, whether it's war or disease, I didn't want to shut down myself from using the actual materials of a decaying body to do so. I don't know if I'm answering you precisely, but I'm attaching that earning it question, I'm attaching it to using the materials of the subject I'm discussing.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it partially goes back to the sincerity question or the kind of skepticism about your materials, which is that for you, they're symbolic, but they're not just symbolic. They have to be,
they're the thing itself.
They're the thing itself, and they're very precise in that way. I mean, you're coming to my seminar tomorrow. Everyone's very excited, Feminist and Queer Theories in Art. And a few weeks ago, we studied the work of the Mexican artist, Teresa Margolles, and it was very hard to look at her work right now. It's always hard to look at her work, actually. She asks extremely tough questions about spectacle and narco death, et cetera. And she also uses remains in a really different way from how you do, but we did have a lot of questions about the ethics of that and the sensitivity or insensitivity to those matters. And I guess, people ask you all the time about your work with bones, but I'm gonna ask it again, which is maybe, I get that for you it's about this truth, like you felt like you had to grapple with these huge questions of geopolitical conflict and U.S. imperialism, et cetera, through bone dust. And you've also really pressed on the idea that what you're doing is enacting a kind of transformation. So it's not like, anyway, I guess something that Margolles sometimes does is they're not particularly transformed away from, sometimes she shows like skin that is skin from the morgue, and and there it is untransformed. Is it different to you that you go through some procedures?
Yes, the transformation is key for me here. And that comes along with ethical questions, as you said, and I hope things I've given the proper attention to. But for example, and I have to relate this back to my time as a DJ, actually, because maybe that seems unexpected, but the reason I would say that is because sampling is a crucial conceptual background to the way I think about objects. One of the most interesting artistic developments of the 20th century was sampling through hip hop. And sampling, as opposed to appropriation, I think there's an important conceptual distinction there. But the point of sampling and its radical, political potential was that you took the detritus, the castaway, the B-side of records literally in the trash, and through the proper manipulation of them on a turntable, could unlock an entirely new universe, entirely new pathway through that information. And that basic premise of making do with the materials around you to find a new universe in them is not just something that sampling does. It's in the tradition of all human cultures, especially in times of conflict. And for example, I was very interested in trench art for a long time. Soldiers themselves using the materials of warfare to make games, to make intricate carvings, using the dust of the ground to make marbles, to play a game of marbles, meaning that their comrades were in that dust in some sense. But the point I'm getting at is that I've really wanted to press hard on an assumption we make about altering something. And there's sort of a given that to alter something means to destroy it, that some information was lost from A to B. I don't accept that premise. And DJ culture is the reason largely why in my own upbringing, because transformation was always a constructive process, not a destructive one. And not only was it constructive, it was the most powerful when the original use of the material completely gets upended in the process, like taking a tank shell that had just been fired on you and carving intricate floral designs in it to make a vase to give to a friend. History is littered with these incredible artistic misuses of the material that aren't destructive. There was something else in there through the transformation. And so I always do that in my work, that it may have begun with, in the case of human remains, something very problematic to think about, but what it turned into was somehow, I hope, a type of redemptive quality, that there was something else pulled out of it that would have been lost if it had only remained as dust. Not everybody comes along with me on that. Always open to debating it and thinking about it, because I certainly want to get it right. But for where I'm at and the questions I'm asking, what does truth to materials mean is always on my mind, particular to the subject matter that I'm working on. And sometimes that means I need to go there. I need to find bullet lead buried in the ground and use it to produce something that has to do with the rehabilitation of an amputee. So yeah, I want to give it another life.
Well, I think we have time for maybe one or two questions. Thank you, Dario, for all your thoughtful responses.
You're welcome.
I see a hand in the back.
Yeah.
So, thank you so much for your talk. I thought that you did such a nice job of going through how thoroughly your practice sits at a pretty vexed relationship between fan and star. So, I mean, on the one hand, people like Rhonda Lieberman have said that, fandom is actually a pretty selfish act, like almost cannibalistic. It's a way of, just consuming a star. But because of your interest in Morrissey, I thought of William E. Jones's documentary, Is It So Strange, where he documents, Latinx fans of Morrissey. And in a way, I think that film shows how fandom transcends questions of race and class. But in both cases, there's something about the relationship of the fan that reflects back on with the star that reflects back on the fan. So I wonder, throughout your practice, what have you learned about yourself? Or is there more of something that illuminates the self through this relationship with fans?
Those are great observations about fandom. I alluded in the beginning my concern about the darker strands of fandom today, and it's all intertwined with the selfishness of it. So much so that I think we just sort of assume that being a fan, some levels, is selfish act. I'm still a student of it. Things like, Taylor Swift or Nicki Minaj fan clubs, harshly coming out because they got a bad review on their album. And the power that's welded by stars today in moments like that bother me because the dynamic's changing about the behavior that's possible from this type of commitment, which I hope I'm displaying another route through the same story. And, I could have used the word love every time I said the word fan today, and it would have been the same thing. I'm just interchanging one for the other there. And so if I had said love through all of it, we would have, I think we probably would have read it differently, everything I'm saying today. But you put the word fan in and you can't detach it from some of the darker strains of it. But what I hope I conveyed is that to me, fandom was the initial stage of a reciprocal process of gift exchange. Not selfish, give me what I want. Like when fans get upset that an artist doesn't put out the exact album they wanted or put it out when they want it. I have no patience for that. I don't demand that from the people that I admire. But as it relates to myself, it's just a variation on what I just said. It's a model that I'm trying to aspire to. The best of fandom, all the list I put down, I hope the best of it. There are things out there, there are ethical stances out there that I want to aspire to, I want to reach. In no way am I suggesting I've got there, but I made the fandom also become a process of self-exploration in that way. Like what does it mean to be an ethically conscious human today in a consumerist, give me selfish society? And it became very political, as I realized over the years. When I was early on, I couldn't have quite verbalized it that way. And I don't want to give any hint that I've made it. I have not. I'm working on it. But I was drawn to artists who I felt themselves, through their own work, were also aspiring to something. Like, if you do know anything about Morrissey, to know that the Morrissey of 2022 made that remark, it's hard to reconcile those things, which says something interesting about the way people change over time, and that my fandom is expansive enough, as I said, that I'll stay engaged, even if I don't agree with where they've gone politically or artistically. And so it was a test of commitment, and people find that in different ways in their lives. And I want the art that I tend to be drawn to, and the art that I hope I make, is also the subtext. There is this aspiration to get to this space. Yeah.
I was just going to say that I wished that Abigail DeKosnik were here in the audience, and she obviously co-sponsored this because as someone who has written a lot of critical fan studies, someone who really has theorized how to be a fan is to be a critical witness, to be someone who knows, has this incredibly deep knowledge, but isn't just passively absorbing, someone who's able to talk back and that there's some dialogue often. And she also acknowledges how there can be these alternative communities formed. And I think, Dario, when we first met, of course, Dario was really like one of the OG Latinx Smiths fans of Texas in the 80s. Like, very much that affinity is fascinating. And I think, we've talked a lot about why, how interesting it all is. But I think for sure that I feel that it's really special to think about how fandom also can bring together people who have absolutely nothing else in common, have absolutely nothing else in common. But I'm sure that if you put everyone in the same room who diligently buys the Guinness Book of World Records every year, it would be a pretty interesting crew, You would be around a really interesting set of people, I love subcultural
collecting circles.
Absolutely.
Oh, God.
I think we might be out of time. I don't know, actually, but Lori is shaking her head yes to me. But I just want to thank all of you for showing up in person to this, and to thank Dario most of all for the wonderful talk.